The small bell above the door jingled as Mark Bennett locked up his bookshop for the evening. Rain pattered against the windows as he pulled his coat tighter around himself. Running the store alone since his wife Clara passed had been hard, but the people of Westbrook had helped him through the darkest times. As Mark walked home through the drizzle, he noticed flashing blue lights ahead. His heart skipped a beat when he realized they were outside his small cottage. 2 police cars sat in his driveway, and officers stood by their vehicles. "Mr. Bennett?" A tall man in a dark coat approached. "I'm Detective Wilson. We need you to come with us for questioning about the robbery at First National Bank this afternoon." Mark felt like the ground had fallen away beneath his feet. There must be some mistake. "I've been at my shop all day. We have witnesses and video that suggests otherwise," Detective Wilson said firmly. "Please come with us now." Mark noticed his neighbors peering from behind curtains. His brother-in-law Robert, the chief of police, was away at a training course in London. With shaking hands, Mark was led to the police car, completely confused by what was happening. At the station, they put him in a small, cold room. Detective Wilson showed him blurry security footage of someone who looked just like him taking money from a frightened bank teller. "That's not me," Mark insisted, leaning forward in his chair. "I was helping customers all afternoon." Mrs. Parker came in for her weekly mystery novel. Mr. Thompson ordered a special book for his grandson. "I never left the shop." No one seemed to believe him. The evidence looked strong. The man in the video had the same height, build, and even walked with the slight limp Mark had from an old football injury. "We'll hold you overnight while we continue our investigation," Detective Wilson said, closing his notebook. A young officer led Mark to a cell. The door clanged shut behind him, the sound echoing in his ears. He sat on the thin mattress, head in his hands. How could this be happening? He had never broken a law in his life. Mark thought about his shop. Who would open tomorrow if he was stuck here? What would people think when they heard Mark Bennett had been arrested? In a small town like Westbrook, news traveled fast. He tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the looks on his neighbors' faces as he was taken away. Would anyone believe him? Would this destroy the life he had carefully rebuilt after Clara died? Morning came slowly. Mark had dark circles under his eyes when a different officer brought him a cup of tea. "Your brother-in-law is here," the officer said. Robert Taylor looked worried as he entered the room. He wasn't in uniform, having rushed back from London when he heard the news. "Mark, I came as soon as they called me," Robert said, sitting across from him. "Tell me what happened." "Nothing happened. I was at the shop all day, Rob. Someone who looks like me robbed that bank, but it wasn't me." Robert nodded slowly. "The footage is convincing, but I know you. There must be proof you were at the shop." He paused. "Didn't you install security cameras last month after that break-in?" Mark's eyes widened. "Yes. I did. The footage will show I was there the whole time." Robert made several phone calls. Within hours, they had the footage from Mark's bookshop, clearly showing him helping customers during the time of the robbery. "This clears you," Robert said, relief in his voice. "But it raises another question. Who is the man who looks so much like you?" Mark was released, but as he walked through the police station, he felt the stares of officers who had been sure of his guilt. Outside, he overheard someone say, "Only got off because his brother-in-law is the chief." The weight of false accusation felt heavy on his shoulders as he stepped into the sunlight. He was free, but he knew his troubles were far from over. In a town like Westbrook, mud stuck even when you were innocent. Mark took a deep breath and began the long walk home, wondering how he would face his neighbors and customers now. The E&D Mark reopened his bookshop 2 days later. He stood behind the counter, arranging a display of new releases, but his heart wasn't in it. The bell above the door remained silent most of the morning. When it finally jingled, Mark looked up with hope, only to see his employee Tom slip inside. "Sorry I'm late," Tom said, hanging up his coat. "How's it going?" Mark gestured to the empty shop. This is how it's been since I opened. Tom frowned. Give people time. Once they catch the real bank robber, everything will get back to normal. But Mark wasn't so sure. He had spent 25 years building trust in Westbrook. Now it seemed broken overnight. At lunchtime, Mark walked to the small cafe across the street. As he entered, the usual friendly chatter stopped. He felt eyes watching him as he ordered a sandwich to go. When he passed by the table where the town's retired teachers usually sat, Mrs. Williams, who had always greeted him warmly, looked down at her soup instead. Back at the shop, Mark ate alone, flipping through a book without really reading it. The afternoon dragged by with only 3 customers, none of whom met his eyes. At closing time, there was a knock on the door. It was Betty Wright, the elderly librarian who had been Mark's friend for decades. "I brought apple pie," she said, holding up a covered dish. "And I don't believe for one second you had anything to do with that robbery." Her simple words of trust broke something inside Mark, and tears filled his eyes. "Thank you, Betty. Come in." They sat in the back room where Mark kept a small kettle for tea. As they ate pie, Betty asked, "Have you thought about who might look so much like you?" Mark shook his head, but then froze with a memory. "Peter," he whispered. "Your cousin Peter?" Betty asked. Mark nodded slowly. "We were often mistaken for brothers when we were younger. People used to joke that our mothers must have mixed us up at family gatherings." "Where is Peter now?" Betty asked, pouring more tea. "I don't know. We lost touch years ago when he..." Mark paused. "When he asked me for money to pay gambling debts. I said no because I knew he would just gamble it away again. He was so angry. Said I'd regret not helping family." Betty reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Could he have done this to get back at you? After all these years?" Mark frowned. "Maybe. Or maybe he's just desperate for money again." "You need to tell Robert about this," Betty insisted. That evening, Mark called his brother-in-law. Robert listened carefully. "I remember Peter," Robert said. "You two could have been twins sometimes. Do you have any idea where he might be now?" "Last I heard, he was living in Millfield. About 10 years ago." "It's a place to start," Robert replied. "I'll look into it first thing in the morning." Mark slept better that night, knowing there might be a real lead. But in the morning, a brick came crashing through his shop window, sending glass everywhere. Attached to it was a note: "Guilty men don't belong here." Tom helped him clean up and put cardboard over the window. "People are idiots," Tom muttered. By afternoon, Robert called with news. Peter Graham was living in Millfield until about a month ago. His landlord said he left owing 2 months' rent. No forwarding address. "So he's in the wind," Mark said, feeling defeated. "Not entirely. We found fingerprints at the bank that don't match yours. If they're Peter's, we can prove it wasn't you." That evening, as Mark was locking up, a car slowed down in front of the shop. The driver rolled down the window and yelled, "Police can't protect you forever," before speeding away. Mark's hands shook as he finished locking the door. As he walked home, he noticed people crossing the street to avoid him. At the corner store, where he'd shopped for years, the owner asked him to leave. "I can't have you in here, Mark. Bad for business." "Nothing personal." It felt very personal. When Mark reached his cottage, he found his front door spray-painted with the word thief. He stood there, staring at the red letters, when a voice behind him made him jump. "Mr. Bennett?" A young woman stood there, holding a reporter's notebook. "Jane Foster from the Westbrook Gazette. I'm doing a story on the bank robbery. How does it feel to be the main suspect?" Mark pushed past her without answering and went inside, slamming the door. He leaned against it, breathing hard, wondering how much worse things could get. The E&D Mark sat in his living room, staring at the untouched cup of tea on the table before him. 3 days had passed since the brick came through his shop window. The newspaper had run a front-page story about the robbery, with his name mentioned multiple times. Though the article stated he had been released without charges, the damage was done. The phone rang. It was Robert. "I have news," his brother-in-law said. "We found an old mugshot of Peter from a drunk and disorderly charge 5 years ago. The resemblance is still remarkable. I've put out an alert for him. Will that help clear my name with the town?" Mark asked. Robert hesitated. "It might take time. People form opinions quickly." After the call, Mark forced himself to eat something. As he washed his plate, he spotted Mrs. Henderson from next door watching him through her window. When their eyes met, she quickly closed her curtains. The next morning, Mark got to his shop early to clean up more broken glass. Someone had thrown another rock during the night. As he swept, a car pulled up. A middle-aged man Mark didn't recognize stepped out. "Mr. Bennett? I'm David Palmer. I own the hardware store in Millfield." Mark set down his broom. "What can I do for you? I saw the article about you in the paper." "The man they're looking for, your cousin, he came into my store multiple times last month. Always paid cash, bought odd items. Gloves, duct tape, spray paint." Mark invited him inside. "Did you tell the police?" "I'm going there next. But I wanted to meet you first. The last time he was in my shop, he was bragging to someone on the phone about how a perfect plan was coming together. Something about teaching someone a lesson. Did he say anything else?" "Just that he needed money fast and that his rich cousin wouldn't help him. Said he'd found a better way to get what he needed." After David left, Mark called Robert immediately. This was the first real evidence that Peter might have planned the robbery specifically to frame him. By afternoon, news had spread through town. A few curious customers came into the shop, asking questions Mark wasn't comfortable answering. He felt like an animal in a zoo. "You should make a statement," Tom suggested during a quiet moment. "Get ahead of the gossip." "And say what? That my cousin might be framing me because I wouldn't give him gambling money a decade ago? It sounds unbelievable even to me." Later that day, the bell jingled and Mark looked up to see Frank Collins, owner of the local garage, standing awkwardly by the door. "Frank," Mark said, surprised. They had been friends for years, but Frank had been avoiding him since the arrest. "I came to apologize," Frank said, removing his cap. "I should have known better than to believe you'd do something like that. Known you 20 years. You helped me when Marie was sick. I should have stood by you." Mark swallowed hard. "It's okay, Frank." "No, it's not. None of us have been fair to you." After Frank left, a weight seemed lighter on Mark's shoulders. One friend believed in him again. It was a start. That evening, as Mark was closing up, Betty arrived with dinner. "You need to eat properly," she insisted. As they shared the meal, a car screeched to a halt outside. Robert burst through the door, looking excited. "We've got him. Peter tried to rob another bank in Fairfield this afternoon. They caught him red-handed." Mark felt dizzy with relief. "He's admitted to the Westbrook robbery too?" "Not yet, but the evidence is solid. The fingerprints match. Plus we found notes in his car about your schedule, your shop hours. He's been watching you for weeks." The next morning, Mark woke to the sound of his phone ringing. It was Jane Foster from the newspaper. "Mr. Bennett, I'd like to do a follow-up story. About how you were wrongfully accused. Would you be willing to talk to me?" Mark agreed to meet her at the shop. When he arrived, there was a small bouquet of flowers on the doorstep with a card that read, "We're sorry we doubted you, the Hendersons." Inside, he found Tom already setting up for the day. "You've seen the morning paper?" Tom asked, holding it up. The headline read, "Local businessman cleared, cousin arrested in bank robbery scheme." "It's a start," Mark said, allowing himself a small smile. Throughout the morning, people began to trickle in. Some bought books they didn't really need. Others just wanted to apologize. Mark accepted their words graciously, though the hurt still lingered. At lunchtime, a hesitant knock came at the door. It was the owner of the corner store. "I was wrong to treat you that way," he said, offering his hand. "I hope you'll shop with us again." Mark shook his hand but made no promises. Some wounds would take longer to heal than others. The E&D Mark stood outside the police station, gathering his courage. 1 week had passed since Peter's arrest, and Robert had called that morning to say his cousin was finally willing to talk. Not to the police, but to Mark. "You don't have to do this," Robert said, meeting him in the lobby. "No one would blame you for refusing." Mark took a deep breath. "I need to understand why he did it." The interview room was small and plain. Peter sat at the table, handcuffed. The cousins stared at each other in silence. Despite a decade apart, the resemblance was still striking, though Peter looked older, his face lined with hard living. "You came," Peter finally said. "Why, Peter? Why would you do this to me?" Peter looked down at his hands. "It wasn't supposed to go like this. You weren't supposed to get arrested. What did you think would happen?" Mark's voice shook. "You robbed a bank looking exactly like me. I needed money fast. I owe some dangerous people. I thought I'd just be gone before anyone could catch me. By the time they figured out it wasn't you, I'd be far away. You've been planning this for weeks. Watching me. Learning my schedule." Peter nodded slowly. "I was desperate. But I never meant for you to get arrested. I remembered how you turned me away when I needed help. I offered to help you get into a gambling program. You didn't want help. You wanted cash." They talked for nearly an hour. Peter admitted to planning the robbery to look like Mark, but claimed he never intended for his cousin to be arrested. He just wanted to use their resemblance as a distraction while he escaped with the money. "I'm sorry," Peter said as Mark stood to leave. "For whatever that's worth." Mark paused at the door. "Why did you turn yourself in for the second robbery? You could have escaped." Peter looked away. "I saw the newspaper. What was happening to you in town? I couldn't live with that." Outside, Robert was waiting. "How did it go?" "As well as could be expected," Mark replied. "He's still my cousin, even after everything." That evening, as Mark closed the shop, Jane Foster appeared again. "My editor wants to know if you'll do a feature story. Wrongly accused, how a case of mistaken identity tore apart a life. We'd focus on the flaws in the system that led to your arrest, how the town treated you." Mark considered the offer. "Would it include how some people stood by me? Betty and Tom never doubted me for a second." "Of course. It could be a story about loyalty as much as injustice." "Then yes, I'll do it." The article ran the following Sunday. Mark's phone didn't stop ringing all day. Old friends called to apologize. Customers who had avoided the shop promised to return. Even Mrs. Henderson brought over a homemade cake. But not everyone was quick to make amends. At the cafe the next day, Mark overheard someone say, there must have been something to it. Why else would his own cousin target him specifically? The road to rebuilding trust was going to be long. That afternoon, Robert visited the shop with unexpected news. "Peter's been talking more. He says there were others involved in planning the robbery. Men who put him up to it, who knew about your relationship and suggested using your resemblance." Mark froze. "What men?" "He's given us names. One of them is William Davis." Mark felt the blood drain from his face. "Bill Davis? The banker?" "But he's been my financial advisor for years. Peter claims Davis knew about some large deposits you made after selling your parents' house last year. He thought you'd make a good target. Wealthy enough to be worth robbing, but not so rich you'd have serious security. I trusted him with everything." Mark sank into a chair. "We're bringing him in for questioning today," Robert assured him. The revelation that someone he trusted had been part of the plot hit Mark harder than the original accusation. It was one thing to be framed by a desperate cousin he barely saw anymore. It was another to learn a man who sat in his shop drinking tea, who helped him with his accounts, had plotted against him. That evening, Mark placed a sign in his shop window: "Community meeting, trust and forgiveness in small towns, everyone welcome. This Saturday at 7 p.m. He wasn't sure if anyone would come, but he knew that healing, both his own and the town's, wouldn't happen through silence. The newspaper article had started conversations, but Mark wanted more than talk. He wanted real change. As he locked up for the night, he spotted Frank across the street, waving him over. "A few of us are having dinner at the pub," Frank said. "Nothing special. But we'd like you to join us, if you want." It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Mark nodded, feeling for the first time in weeks that Westbrook might truly be his home again. The the bookshop was packed on Saturday evening. Mark had moved shelves aside to make room for chairs, but there were still people standing along the walls. He recognized almost everyone: neighbors, customers, even Detective Wilson, who had arrested him. "Thank you all for coming," Mark began nervously. "I wanted to talk about what happened, not just to share my story, but because what happened to me could happen to anyone." He explained how quickly his life had changed after being wrongly accused, how some people had judged him without facts, while others had stood by him without question. "What hurts most isn't just being accused of something I didn't do," Mark said. "It's how easily trust can break after years of building it. And how hard it is to repair." Betty stood up from her chair in the front row. "I've known Mark for 30 years. Not once did I believe he could do what they said. We need to be better at standing by people we know, even when things look bad." Frank spoke next. "I failed as a friend. I let fear and gossip change how I saw a good man. I'm sorry, Mark." Others shared similar thoughts. Mrs. Henderson admitted she had been afraid to let her grandchildren visit after hearing the news. The corner shop owner apologized again for turning Mark away. Then Robert stood up. He wasn't in uniform, just a regular neighbor tonight. "As police, we have a duty to follow evidence," he said. "But we moved too quickly with Mark. We should have checked his shop's security footage before making an arrest. We're changing our procedures because of what happened." Detective Wilson nodded in agreement. The meeting lasted 2 hours. People shared stories of times they had been judged unfairly or had judged others too quickly. By the end, many were wiping away tears. "So what now?" someone asked. Mark smiled. "Now we rebuild. Not just my reputation, but our community. We learn to trust again, carefully, but with open hearts." 3 days later, William Davis confessed to planning the robbery with Peter. He had targeted several clients, using their financial information to plan crimes. Mark had been chosen because of the coincidence of his cousin's resemblance and his recent inheritance. The next weekend, when Mark arrived at his shop, he found Tom and a group of volunteers painting the front of the building. "What's going on?" Mark asked. "Just a little community project," Tom grinned. The paint was donated by the hardware store. Throughout the day, more people showed up to help. Some brought food, others just wanted to talk. Children made colorful signs for the windows. By sunset, the bookshop looked better than it had in years. As everyone gathered for pizza in the newly painted shop, Betty pulled Mark aside. "Have you visited Peter lately?" Mark shook his head. "Not since that first time. Maybe you should. Family is still family, even when they make terrible mistakes." The following Tuesday, Mark returned to the police station. Peter looked surprised to see him. "I didn't think you'd come back," his cousin said. "Neither did I," Mark admitted. "But here I am." They talked about their childhood, about the paths their lives had taken, about the choices that had led them to this moment. "I've been thinking," Mark said finally. "When you get out, if you're serious about changing, I could use help at the shop." Peter stared at him in shock. "After what I did to you? Why would you offer that?" "Because everyone deserves a second chance. Even you." Even this town that was quick to judge me. On his way out, Robert caught up with him. That's a generous offer you made. Are you sure about it? No, Mark smiled. But it feels right. 6 months later, Mark's bookshop hosted its first Second Chance book club. They discussed novels about redemption and forgiveness. Peter joined by phone from prison, offering insights that surprised everyone with their depth. The shop was busier than ever. Mark had added a small coffee corner where people lingered to talk. The window that had once been broken now displayed a sign, "Everyone has a story. Know it before you judge it." 1 year after the robbery, Mark received a letter from the town council. They wanted to honor him at the annual Westbrook Festival for fostering community healing and demonstrating the power of forgiveness. As Mark read the letter, the bell above the door jingled. Mrs. Henderson entered with her grandchildren. "Story time still at 3 o'clock, she asked. "Wouldn't miss it," Mark smiled, watching the children rush to the children's corner he had expanded. Outside his window, life in Westbrook continued. People walked by and waved. Some stopped to look at the books displayed. Mark waved back, feeling at home again in the town that had once turned against him. His phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Davis is sentencing tomorrow. You still coming?" Mark typed back, "Yes. Some chapters need to be closed before new ones can begin." The end.